So I want to say that I'm very happy to be here. This is my second time in Toronto. First time in this type of large conference. Typically we go to the Alzheimer's conferences in Europe. It's closer, and basically the same people are going to the same conferences, so it's just the same. Couple of words about myself. I'm 46 years old, married to Sarit. She was born in the kibbutz, kibbutz Alumim. We have 5 kids. 2 of them were made when we were in the USA. Made in USA, yeah. We should have been here, right? That's one mistake you cannot... Okay, so I studied my... after the army service, I started my bachelor studies in biology at Bar-Ilan University, and then I continued to a master's degree and a PhD degree at the same faculty of life sciences. And following the PhD, I went to conduct my postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute on Aging in Baltimore, Maryland. That's part of NIH, National Institutes of Health. Okay. And we've been there for 4 years. And over there I studied how does our immune system affects our brain, our cognition. And turned out that our immune system does indeed affect our brain development as well as our ability to think. Now that was very interesting. Following 4 years, I received a position at Bar-Ilan University in the same faculty. I was very happy. It's like going back home. I knew everybody, and it was a very easy start there. And over there, I started to study neurodegenerative diseases. The first grant application that I got was from the Michael J. Fox Foundation, funding Parkinson's disease-related research, and that was my entry into this world of trying to find therapies for diseases of the brain that characterize the elderly, okay? Age-related diseases. And so I prepared a presentation that shortly describes the research in our lab. I'm not going deep into it. This is not the conference on Alzheimer's, and I'm tired from that conference. Let's take it easy now. And then I will describe some concepts related to brain aging and how can we try and promote health of our brain. Therefore, yeah, okay. So at first I want to describe several topics that are being studied in our lab. Our lab is a neuroimmunology lab. So broadly speaking, we try to understand how our immune system communicates with the brain. And one of the projects that we conduct is studying how immune system, and whether the immune system and why penetrates the brain during aging and diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. We try to understand whether the immune system has a causal role in these diseases. Why? Because it's one of the easiest things to manipulate in the body. I'm talking about the immune system, right? You can ablate cells, you can deplete them, you can supplement cells. All of these things are interventions that we can do once we understand the nature of the interaction between these systems. Okay, so that's one thing that we are doing. Second topic, which is, to me, extremely interesting. This is the topic that I presented in the conference today. And it has to do with how pregnancy affects maternal cognition. So I know that there is a popular saying that following pregnancy, there is a reduced cognitive abilities that women feel. Subjectively, objectively, we can discuss it. But this particular topic has to do with what happens when the fetus has Down syndrome. Okay, Down syndrome is the most prevalent genetic developmental disorder of the fetus. It's quite prevalent. 1 in 500 pregnancies has Down syndrome. Actual live birth is a little bit lower prevalence, 1 in 750. I'm talking about on average worldwide. There are countries in which it is much higher. For example, Ireland. Ireland has the highest proportion of Down syndrome babies. Anyone knows who's the lowest? Come on, all the countries. Norway, no. Israel, no. It's actually pretty high. Thailand. Apparently they have a very good health system, which enables them to screen pregnancies and intervene in case that it's needed and wanted. So, turns out that such pregnancies with a Down syndrome fetus increase the maternal risk for Alzheimer's disease by 5-fold. Okay? That's on top of the already 2-fold higher risk for Alzheimer's in women compared to men. Okay? And therefore, when we approach such a topic, at least in this instance, I'm trying to deliver to you the kind of thinking process that we undergo in our lab. So when we want to study such a topic, we propose different mechanisms. So for example, cells from the fetus can transfer or migrate to the maternal body, go to the maternal brain, and impair the mother's cognition. This phenomena actually happens in all pregnancies. Every pregnancy, doesn't matter whether the fetus has a disease or doesn't have a disease, cells from the fetus migrate to the maternal brain, to the maternal tissues, including the brain. The reason is very interesting because, at least that's the hypothesis, that the fetus sends cells to the mother in order to help the mother cure wounds and infections. And when you think about it, this is very, the fetus has an interest that the mother will have a higher survival. Okay? So this mechanism evolved, and it's a very interesting mechanism. However, in this case, it also causes Alzheimer's for the mother. Now, in eras in which people never lived beyond the age of 30, it doesn't matter. But nowadays, that our lifespan increases linearly, and it is expected to increase further, this starts to be important. Okay? That's why we study this phenomena and its mechanisms, of course, towards developing drugs and interventions. Another topic that we've been doing for 13 years in the lab is developing vaccines for Alzheimer's disease. It is most likely that Alzheimer's disease cannot be cured completely. However, it's possible to delay the onset of this disease. And we only need to postpone the onset by 5 to 10 years. This way, our elderly reach their lifespan with a high cognitive ability. You may suffer from other things, cardiovascular diseases, etc. But our aim as researchers of this field is to make sure that we all get to the end line. Is that the right term, end line? With a high cognitive ability. We want to know who our grandchildren are, know who our children are, and by that making sure that they know who we are. Okay. So let's look a little bit at the numbers. Dementia rates start to increase from when we age 60. And then every 5 years, you can see it here, the rate double. Okay? Such that when the population reaches the age of 85, 1/3 of the population at that age suffers from this dementia or another. Now, if we aim biomedically to increase our lifespan, and therefore reaching not only 85 but 90, then you can double 30. What you get 60%. So more than half of the population is expected in the near future to suffer from dementia. Now, this starts to be a significant number. At present, 1 of 3 elderly will have dementia. Okay, so imagine if everybody here were 85, 1/3 of this audience demented. We cannot, well, I didn't say what the other 2/3 have, right? Okay, so this is concerning because it has it increases the social burden on family members. As a result, it has a burden on the economy because when family members need to take care of their family member, as parents, they can spend less time, for example, at work or doing community services, etc. So this is a major issue that we have to invest in order to benefit later. So since the majority of cases of dementia are related to Alzheimer's disease, we decided to study Alzheimer's disease. Because if we can make a small change in the risk for Alzheimer's, we can make a big difference in the global population. So there are other researchers that study Parkinson's disease, frontal dementia, vascular dementia, but the major effect will come from Alzheimer's disease research. I'm going to show you a movie now that is perhaps the most important in this part of the talk, and it has to do with understanding when do the changes in our brain initiate before we sense symptoms, before we observe symptoms. So I want you to look at 2 things. One is the number here. It starts at -25, so 25 years before symptoms appear. And the other is the color bar here. It will show you, areas of changing color from purple to blue, etc. And these will signify the process of accumulation of toxic proteins in the brain. So these are the 2 things I want you to follow. I will start this movie now. Okay, here we go. 20 years beforehand, you already start to see changes in the brain, accumulation of this toxic protein in various regions of the brain. Notice that only now we are 10 years from symptoms appearance. And we walk about as if everything is okay, except Trump, right? Notice this, only now symptoms appeared, but what do you see? You see that the brain is already saturated. Now, one of the problems, as far as I'm concerned, with the regulation that is taking place with drugs for Alzheimer's disease is that drugs are administered to people that already show symptoms. As you saw here, when people start to show symptoms, their brain is already experiencing some 20 years of changes, pathological changes under the hood, and we are not aware of that. Let me show it to you again, emphasizing the point of symptoms appearance. Let's jump here. Well, 6 years, 5 years before symptoms appear. Yeah, pretty close. So let's say the particular patient is about to be diagnosed. Why? Because one of their children or one of their spouse senses that there is something weird going on. Then there is a long process of you go to your family doctor, a neurologist, a psychogerontologist, and it's a long process, at least in Israel, that I'm familiar with. But you see that even before symptoms appear, the brain is already saturated. Now, at this time point, or maybe a year later, we can administer drugs. There were 2 drugs that were approved in the USA. Only one of them was approved in Europe. And these drugs, it's basically antibodies, whoever is interested, and they can almost completely get rid of what you see here. However, since this is accompanied with loss of neuronal tissue, the drugs cannot bring back the lost tissue. So it can maybe prevent subsequent damage, but it cannot restore cognition. So we're left with people that they have cognitive decline, a significant cognitive decline, and they get drugs, and it doesn't help. So what we need to do, our challenge, is to achieve earlier diagnosis. So we basically have 25 years of window to intervene. I think that it's a sufficient amount of time to intervene and achieve those 5 to 10 years of delay until onset. Okay, I hope this concept is understood, because I think that it's the most important one. There is a very hot debate, actually among physicians, that argue whether people should engage in earlier diagnosis or not. Because if you engage in earlier diagnosis and you find out that you have a pathological process and there is not an effective drug yet, you may be stressed because of that. As if we're not stressed already. And the other camp says, well, if you will not engage in earlier diagnosis, we will never be able to test new drugs or the already present drugs, that I think they're pretty good, at an earlier time point. So just wanted to put it forward in order for you to understand that there is a lively debate on how to treat people with Alzheimer's disease. Bless you. Okay, so what can we do in the meantime in absence of an effective early diagnosis or therapy? So we'll get to it in a second. I just want to emphasize, nowadays it is possible to engage in earlier diagnosis. It's not using blood tests, also using brain imaging, but it is not a common practice, and there are no regulations for what to do if you diagnose a person with Alzheimer's disease, okay? So what are the different factors that affect the risk for Alzheimer's, for good or bad, okay? So we have, of course, our genetics, and I will expand on it soon. Sleep is one of the major factors that affect our brain's activity and function. Physical activity, stress, food intake, important, oral hygiene, I will explain on that, and maybe surprisingly to some of you, immunization or vaccinations against common pathogens. turns out that vaccinating people against pathogens reduce the risk for Alzheimer's. We'll talk about that as well. So a little bit about genetics. Alzheimer's disease, for the most part, is a late onset disease. So the vast majority of cases are 75, 80, 85, 90 years, and a minority of the cases are due to a specific gene, which when it is mutated, 100% that you will have the disease. But it's a fraction of the cases. The majority are due to the accumulation of mutations. Let me guide you through this graph. Tell them that I'm busy. Okay. On the y-axis, the higher the gene, each gene is signified by a circle, the higher the gene is, the higher its contribution for the risk for Alzheimer's disease. And here, the more the gene is to the right, the more prevalent it is in the population. So for example, this particular gene is present in half of this audience, 50% of the population, but its contribution is very low, almost negligible. These are the genes in which, when they are mutated, 100% you will get early onset Alzheimer's disease. So this is the highest risk, but when you look at the prevalence, it is almost negligible. Okay? So we don't need to worry about that. As far as I can see, you're past that stage. Okay? That's a good thing. You are not going to hear many good things here. No, I exaggerated. Maybe a couple of good things. Now, here in between, you can see a gene, very important gene called ApoE. ApoE, when it is mutated, it increases our risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease by anywhere between 15 and 40%. That's significant. And therefore, what can we do? Now you have to get back to what I mentioned earlier. You have to decide on which camp you want to be. Those that know that they're going to have a high risk for Alzheimer's, or those that do not want to be there. Just as an exercise in raising hands, how many of you want to know whether they have a risk gene for Alzheimer's? That's actually a hefty number. I think more than half. I saw you, yes. All right, half of you. That's very impressive, in my opinion. It's more than in other places that I've seen. I think it's a good thing. Now, so what can be done in that respect? So now the other half can go watch their phones, I don't know, call their friends, their children. So how do we diagnose for the presence of these genes? So there are a couple of companies. For example, there is a company called the C2N that makes kits in which you take a swab of your mouth, put it in a tube, you send it to the company along with some money, and then they give you an answer whether your day is going to be really bad, if it's going to be somewhat bad, or that it's a terrific day, go and drink something in the local pub. Okay? That's one type of tests for early diagnosis in which we all can utilize or use, but in a private manner, right? Not through any kind of insurance or something like that. The second type is actually, or the second type of assays actually measures proteins that come from the brain and signifying a disease in the brain. Okay? These tests are present. You can also take them, again, privately. And they can tell you whether in the next 2-3 years you will start a disease process. Okay? Second thing that I want to mention is sleep. Now, everybody knows that sleep is important, but why? I want to it's not respected to say I wanna, right? I want to share 3 reasons for why sleep is important. Now, that's another short movie. I really like it because it depicts an area in our brain, or a structure in our brain, called the brain ventricles. Look at it. It's a beautiful structure. It's filled with what we call the CSF. CSF, cerebral spine fluid. It's basically a fluid that is filtered from our blood. Okay, so this red tissue that exists here in each one of these, we call it ventricles or rooms. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. These structures filter our blood and generate the CSF. Now, this CSF can also be also present along our spinal cord, and it is used to measure changes in proteins in the brain that are related to Alzheimer's disease. Okay? So, these structures, however, are also involved in removing waste from our brain. And the waste removal, the waste removal is critical to avoid diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. This waste removal only happens when we are sleeping, or to the most part when we are sleeping. Another reason, so that's reason number 1. Reason number 2, I went one too long. And it's a reason that was actually described by another researcher from our faculty. His name is Lior Eppelbaum. And he found that when we are awake, like most of us right now, when we are awake, our neurons work. When they are working, they work by, inducing electrical activity. To do this, the cells need oxygen. That's why we breathe, but don't tell anybody. Okay? We use oxygen. Now, when we use oxygen, there is a byproduct called reactive oxygen species. Those antioxidants that you, I guess, put a lot of money on are aimed at reducing the levels of those reactive oxygen species. Why? Because they cause damage to our DNA. When a cell in our brain accumulates DNA damage constantly throughout our life, eventually it will die. Now what happens, one of the things that happen when we sleep is that the DNA in our cells undergoes repair, and it happens only when we are sleeping, okay? In certain brain regions. This is reason number 2. Reason number 3 is during sleep, we consolidate memories from short-term to long-term. Without proper sleep, we will not be able to generate these memories, and our ability to memorize things will go down. So I counted 3 reasons for why we sleep. Now I have to ask the doctor if there are additional reasons that he is familiar with. We have a sleep doctor here. What do you say? We have additional ones?
Those are good ones.
That's good ones? Okay. I'll just skip that because it's going to be a long time to explain it. So now that we know that sleep is important, let's talk about what we all do that impairs or reduces our ability to sleep, and that's caffeine. Caffeine shortens the length of our sleep. That's one thing. Second, it interrupts with memory formation. So our sleep is divided into several cycles, okay? And during these cycles, it's going to be complicated to explain it. During these cycles, we engage in, as I said earlier, memory consolidation. So when we shorten the length of the sleep and affect the different stages of sleep during these cycles, we impair our ability to memorize. Okay? And lastly, caffeine was shown to prevent the repair of the DNA in our neurons. So you remember how in the last slide I mentioned that one of the major things that sleep is responsible for is repairing DNA damage, but caffeine prevents it. So caffeine is counterproductive for the elderly if they want to maintain cognitive function. Because coffee or caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours, meaning that after 6 hours, half of the molecules are, broken down, let's go, metabolized. And after 12 hours, most of the molecules will be also metabolized. Then it is preferable not to drink caffeine after noon. Okay? Now, we all know that exercise has beneficial effects on our cognitive abilities. Okay? Recently, there was a study that showed that people that commute to work by walking, by foot, exhibit reduced risk for hospitalization, due to cancer or due to mental health issues by a cumulative percentage of 11%. And that people that commute to work by bicycle, let's say in the Netherlands, for example, they reduce it by 40%. Okay? That's very significant. Okay? For example, if you know that you suffer from one of those genetic risk factors, and you're asking yourself, what can I do to circumvent it? Perhaps activity is a good option for you. Okay? Now, I mentioned oral hygiene. This is actually very interesting because research shows that infections of the oral cavity, particularly with a bacteria called Porphyromonas gingivalis, that mainly characterizes people with chronic periodontitis. These bacteria, due to the inflammation that we have in the gum and the exposure of these nerve endings, these bacteria can penetrate the neuron, go all the way to the base of that neuron. It's a brain region called the locus ceruleus. The name doesn't mean anything. The important thing is to know that since this area of the brain innervates almost the entire brain, this bacteria gets throughout the brain, infects the brain, and causes widespread Alzheimer's disease pathology in patients. If you take the brain of this person and analyze it, you can see many bacteria infecting the neurons. And this is probably avoidable. So there are companies that try to develop therapies for this mechanism. By the way, one thing that I want to say that is also important to remember: Alzheimer's disease is not one disease. It's a syndrome caused by many different causes, reasons, factors, and probably differs between men and women, for example, in some of the causes. So there will never be, well, I don't know if never, but most likely that it's not going to be one drug type that will heal or delay all the types of Alzheimer's. We will have to develop various drugs that tackle different mechanisms. This, in other words, makes our work very difficult and your life shorter. But we have to do it because understanding the mechanisms of these diseases are critical for drug development. And this is a very laborious and tedious process. Sorry. So, next thing I want to say, you remember that I mentioned that vaccinations against common pathogens affect our risk for Alzheimer's? This paper, for example, shows that vaccinating individuals in the population reduces the risk for Alzheimer's by up to 42%. And here they tested or they assessed the vaccinations against tetanus, shingles, diphtheria, and vaccines against influenza can reduce the risk for Alzheimer's by 28%, as you can see in this research. Now, it's pretty odd. Why would vaccines against pathogens will reduce the risk for Alzheimer's? To make a long story short, I will just say that it seems that pathogens, whether they are viruses or fungi or bacteria, can penetrate our brain and cause Alzheimer's disease without us knowing it. I mentioned that, well, I think I already described this thing. With that, I want to finish the first part in which I kind of described the different risk factors for Alzheimer's, what can be done, and what's the type of research that we do in the lab in order to mitigate it.